when was the last time you experienced something like completely uncurated?
Oh, man.
I mean, a moment where no screen, no algorithm, no digital map told you what to expect, and you just had to, surrender to the raw reality right in front of you.
Yeah, it's basically becoming an endangered human experience, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, we've engineered almost all the friction and, by extension, the surprise right out of our daily routines.
We really have. I was actually thinking about this earlier. We look at a restaurant's menu online before we even make a reservation.
Yeah.
We use Street View to walk down a foreign alleyway virtually before we ever even buy the plane ticket.
Exactly. We need to know what it looks like before we get there.
Yeah, we are so obsessed with predicting the future so we don't have to be uncomfortable. But today, we are stripping all of that away. We are going completely analog.
I love it.
We are diving deep into the source material from episode 48 of the No Signal audio journal. And this chronicles an incredibly visceral, boots-on-the-ground backpacking journey taken by a Japanese traveler named Macy.
And, the temporal context here is just everything. We are talking about the year 2001.
Right, 2001.
That specific era, it acts as a really profound counter-narrative to how we live today.
Definitely. And for anyone just jumping into our analysis of Macy's route today, let's establish the scale of this undertaking. In 2001, there is no GPS in your pocket.
No smartphones.
Right, no instant translation apps. Macy has essentially been relying on paper maps, outdated guidebooks, and whatever advice he can just glean from strangers.
Which is wild to think about now.
It is. And he started by hitchhiking the entire frozen length of Japan from Sapporo all the way down to Kyushu.
Wow.
Then, in the dead of winter, he crossed over to South Korea, plunged into the sheer vastness of mainland China, and made his way down to Hong Kong.
The physical endurance required to cover that much geography overland is staggering.
Yeah.
But what makes these sources so compelling isn't just the logistical feat of it all. It's the psychological metamorphosis that happens when you subject yourself to that kind of exposure.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. Today, we're following Macy as he leaves the international hub of Hong Kong and pushes back into mainland China, specifically heading to the southern metropolis of Guangzhou.
Right.
We're going to examine this leg of the journey through a philosophical lens. We're looking at the quiet dissolution of the ego, the strangely powerful mirror of serendipitous encounters, and the spiritual shock of confronting the unsanitized, bloody mechanics of survival.
It's heavy stuff. And, if you are listening to this on a commute right now, or maybe you're glancing at a calendar blocked with back-to-back digital meetings, Macy's reality in 2001 serves as a rather potent antidote.
Mm-hmm.
It really forces us to ask what we are actually losing by hyper-managing every single variable in our lives.
So let's look at the very first variable Macy loses control over the moment he crosses into Guangzhou, which is the climate.
Yes.
The weather. We're tracking his movement through an immense landmass, and the physical whiplash he experiences here is intense. Not long before this, he was way up in Beijing, enduring a bitter, biting cold.
Like, seriously freezing.
Right. Then he moves down to Shanghai, which the journal describes as feeling like a crisp, temperate autumn.
A climate where you still maintain a sort of physical armor, I'd call it.
Right, layers.
Exactly. You're wearing layers, you're braced against the wind, you're moving quickly to stay warm. Your body is basically in a defensive posture against the environment.
But then he boards a train and arrives in Guangzhou. And this isn't like a gradual transition. I read this and tried to find an equivalent modern sensation.
What did you come up with?
It feels akin to walking out of a commercial walk-in freezer directly into a steam sauna, but completely blindfolded.
Blindfolded. That is the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah, you have no visual warning. Suddenly, the heavy jackets are useless. It is pure, oppressive, t-shirt and shorts weather. Just a wall of tropical heat.
It hits you like a truck.
It really does. And I look at this physical shock and I wonder, is this violent shift in temperature actually the catalyst for breaking down a traveler's mental defenses?
That is a highly perceptive way to frame it, actually. Because when you experience a sudden, totally uncontrollable environmental shift, it demands an immediate psychological submission.
Right.
Think about our modern environments, right?
Mm-hmm.
We command the thermostat, we constantly check the radar, we buy specialized gear for highly specific weather patterns.
You need total control.
We do. We exert dominance over our physical space.
Mm-hmm.
But when you step off a train into the tropics of southern China in 2001, you cannot fight the humidity. You cannot micromanage the heat.
You just have to let it hit you.
You have to surrender to it.
Yeah.
And that climate shock essentially melts away that rigid defensive posture Marcy was holding in the colder northern cities. The heat primes him to slow down. It forces his nervous system to relax into a different, much slower rhythm. By dropping his guard against the weather, he inadvertently drops his guard against the culture.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, he becomes highly porous,
Yeah.
ready to absorb the experiences ahead simply because he has stopped trying to fight his environment.
So the geography itself kind of softens him up.
Exactly.
He has surrendered to this tropical reality, and he checks into a local dormitory for backpackers in Guangzhou. Which brings us to a really fascinating dynamic in the source material.
This is one of my favorite parts.
In this dorm, he meets an older Japanese traveler named Kazu-san, who becomes a profound mirror for Marcy's own internal state.
The archetype of the stranger on the road is always potent, but Kazu-san represents a very specific philosophical turning point in this narrative.
The sources paint such a vivid picture of this guy. I mean, Kazu-san is only a few years older than Marcy, but in the hierarchy of your early 20s.
Oh, a 3-year age gap is huge.
Exactly. A 3-year gap paired with extensive travel experience makes you seem like an ancient sage.
A total guru.
Right. And Kazu-san has been doing these long, grueling stints across Southeast Asia, but it's his aura that really commands the space. He's handsome, he's casually stylish, he's sitting in the courtyard of this Guangzhou dorm, chain-smoking, drinking, and he has a portable speaker plugged into a CD player.
Which, by the way, in the hostile ecosystem of 2001, effectively made you the absolute center of gravity.
Totally. He's holding court, he's playing music and chatting in broken English with American and Canadian backpackers passing through.
The cool guy.
The ultimate cool older brother for the younger travelers. And Marcy is absolutely mesmerized. The journal notes he's absorbing Kazu-san's advice on navigating Bangkok and Vietnam, quote, like a piece of blotting paper.
He's just soaking it all in.
He really is. But I have a theory I want to test here with you.
Okay, let's hear it.
I read this interaction and I can't help but wonder about the distortion field of travel.
What do you mean?
Well, was Kazu-san actually a profound mentor dispensing unique wisdom? Or was Marcy simply exhausted, deeply isolated, and so hungry for a familiar cultural anchor that anyone projecting an ounce of confidence would suddenly look like a Zen master?
That is the essential critical question. It is incredibly easy to project profundity onto someone just because they speak your native language in a foreign land. However, to understand why Kazu-san's impact on Marcy is actually genuine, and it really is transformative, we have to examine the cultural sociology of Japan at the turn of the millennium.
Okay.
We need to talk about the concept of the backpacker ego.
I found this part of the source material so fascinating, especially for anyone who hasn't lived in that specific corporate culture.
Right. Because in the late 90s and early 2000s, Japan's corporate environment, the world of the salaryman, was notoriously rigid.
Very strict rules.
Incredibly suffocating. The societal expectations regarding appearance, behavior, career trajectory, everything was tightly controlled. So when young Japanese men and women finally snapped, quit their jobs, and bought a one-way ticket to Asia, they felt an overwhelming need to physically broadcast their rebellion.
They needed to visually prove they had opted out of the system.
Precisely. And the way they did this was by adopting a very specific, aggressive aesthetic.
Like a uniform.
Yes, they would grow out wild, unkempt hair. They would cultivate these massive, bushy beards. They intentionally looked rugged, dirty, and just untamed.
They were performing the role of the vagabond.
They were playing a part.
Which is deeply ironic because they were fleeing a uniform corporate culture only to adopt a brand new uniform to fit into the backpacker culture.
That is the essence of the ego trap right there. They traded the suit and tie for the wild beard and the tattered backpack. It was a costume change, not true liberation.
Wow, yeah.
They were still deeply concerned with how society, or in this case, the micro-society of the hostel, perceived them. They were basically screaming, "Look at how free I am." And, true freedom doesn't need to scream.
Which brings us right back to Kazu-san in the courtyard. The text explicitly notes that Kazu-san completely rejects this performative rebellion.
He does.
He is clean-cut. He is casually stylish. He looks like a normal guy who just happens to be deeply comfortable navigating a foreign environment.
Because Kazu-san possesses authentic self-assurance, he doesn't require a physical costume to validate his identity as a traveler.
Right. He doesn't need the beard.
He doesn't need the wild deer to prove he is free from Tokyo's expectations. He is simply himself, Whether he's trying to decipher a map in Vietnam or sharing a beer with a college kid in Guangzhou. He has shed the ego of the salaryman without taking on the ego of the hardcore backpacker.
And Marcy realizes this. He's watching Kazu-san, and the realization just hits him. He doesn't have to perform for anyone.
It's a huge moment for him.
It really is. The journal mentions that because of this exact encounter, Marcy consciously decides not to grow out a wild traveler's beard. He chooses to just be himself.
Which sounds small, but it's not.
No, it's a subtle physical choice, but it represents a massive internal shift. Kazu-san essentially taught him how to drop the act.
It is a masterclass in quiet authenticity. Marcy learns that true travel isn't about changing what you look like. It's about stripping away the need to project an image entirely.
But, dropping illusions is a painful process, and Marcy's journey of unlearning is about to get incredibly visceral.
Oh boy, yes it is.
He decides to leave the comfort of that dorm courtyard and step out into the streets of Guangzhou. And this city provides a radically different kind of mirror.
The much less forgiving one.
Definitely. Guangzhou carries immense historical weight as a culinary capital. It is famously known as the Mecca of food in China.
Right.
So Marcy walks out into the humidity expecting to find this romanticized culinary paradise. He's anticipating master chefs, elegant ingredients, just the pinnacle of Asian gastronomy.
And what does he find instead?
Instead, his exploration leads him directly into the epicenter of a massive, chaotic wet market.
Which shatters every single preconceived notion he was holding.
The sensory collision described in the sources here is intense. Marcy observes that it doesn't feel like a food market at all. It feels like walking through a bustling, chaotic zoo.
Because the ingredients aren't neatly butchered and portioned on beds of ice?
No, they are alive. They are breathing, making noise, fighting against cages right up until the exact moment a transaction is made.
It's the absolute bedrock reality of the supply chain.
Yeah.
Laid entirely bare without any apologies.
We're talking about pigs, chickens, cows, and sheep, alongside snakes and rabbits.
Yeah.
The auditory overload alone is staggering, but the journal focuses heavily on the smell. The overwhelming, pungent, undeniable odor of livestock filling the humid air.
You can't escape it.
You can't. And visually, he is stepping around the blood of freshly slaughtered chickens flowing directly over the concrete right where he is walking.
There is a famous regional adage mentioned in the text about this.
Oh, yeah.
Because they will eat anything with 4 legs except a table.
It is the kind of quote that sounds charming and adventurous when you are, reading a guidebook from the safety of your living room.
Oh, absolutely.
But standing there, smelling the blood and hearing the animals, it completely obliterates Marcy's romantic illusion of a gourmet mecca.
It's a harsh reality check.
And I want to bridge this directly to how we interact with the world today. I look at this scene and think about the modern, sanitized, upper middle class Western supermarket, the Whole Foods experience.
Where everything is perfectly clean.
Right. We interact with meat that is perfectly square, skinless, boneless, and hermetically sealed in cellophane. It doesn't resemble an animal in the slightest. It resembles a manufactured product.
We have perfected the art of the cellophane illusion. We systematically divorce the final meal from the living creature.
We really do. So Marcy thought he was walking into a high-end gourmet food hall, and instead he is confronted with the mechanics of a slaughterhouse.
A literal slaughterhouse, yeah.
Yeah.
And if we elevate this beyond just a simple culture shock anecdote, what Marcy is experiencing here is a profound spiritual confrontation.
How so?
Well, modern society expends a monumental amount of resources and logistics to edit out the violence inherent in survival. We essentially pay unseen industries to handle the bloody, visceral reality of the food chain, keeping it entirely out of our sightlines so we can maintain clean hands and ostensibly clean consciences.
We demand the luxury of the gourmet meal without having to bear the psychological weight of the kill.
Exactly. But stepping into that market in Guangzhou forces an immediate reckoning. To eat is to consume another life.
Yeah.
There is no philosophical loophole around that biological transaction. Marcy's expectation of an elegant, sanitized culinary experience just shatters against the raw, undeniably bloody reality of what it takes to sustain human life.
It is another profound ego death for him.
It is deeply humbling. It destroys the modern arrogance that human beings somehow sit above or apart from the natural order of the world. Standing on that wet, concrete floor, Marcy is forced to acknowledge his direct participation in the food chain. He cannot look away from his own consumption.
It reorients his entire understanding of survival. I mean, he was looking for a delicious dinner and ends up confronting the cycle of life and death.
It's intense.
It really highlights just how thick the insulation is around our daily lives. And what the sources show next is that this insulation doesn't just apply to how we consume food, it deeply infects how we manage our human relationships, too.
That's a great point.
This becomes incredibly clear in the final segment of Marcy's time in Guangzhou.
We return to his dynamic with Kazu-san. The mentor and the student are preparing for their next moves.
Right, both of them are planning to head further south, crossing the border into Vietnam. And this requires navigating a labyrinth of bureaucracy because in 2001, Vietnam required a very specific, prearranged travel visa.
Not like today where you just show up or click a button online.
Not at all. They go to the consulate in Guangzhou together, fill out the endless paperwork, and secure their entry. But their actual travel logistics are completely unaligned.
They are leaving on different days, utilizing different modes of transport, with completely different paces in mind. The time has come to part ways.
And the way they handle this departure is fascinating to me. They don't engage in any complex logistical planning. They simply part ways with a very casual, let's meet up in Vietnam if we can.
Just like that.
Just like that. And I read that and immediately viewed it through the lens of our current hyper-connected anxiety. I'm like, how do you possibly execute that?
It seems impossible to us.
It really does. There is no location sharing. There are no social media check-ins, no instant messaging. They are walking into a sprawling nation of millions of people across hundreds of miles.
From the perspective of a modern planner, it sounds like absolute madness. It sounds like a guarantee that they will never cross paths again.
It almost feels like a polite brush-off, like a non-committal see you around because you don't actually want to put in the effort to coordinate.
Right, and that is precisely how a Western, digitally tethered mind interprets it. But within the context of this journey, this farewell points to a deeply Eastern philosophical concept regarding emptiness.
Emptiness.
Yes, often referred to as Ma, or the beauty of the void.
The beauty of the void. Okay, how does that apply to a travel itinerary?
Think about how we operate today. We suffer from an absolute intolerance for empty space. If we want to meet someone, we send a calendar invite, we lock in a specific GPS coordinate, we dictate the exact time.
We overplan everything.
We exert total control over the interaction, squeezing all the ambiguity out of it. We fear the void, so we fill it with data.
Wow, yeah.
But in the analog travel culture of 2001, journeys were fundamentally built on an acceptance of the unknown. By not forcing a strict, rigid plan, by purposefully leaving the logistics empty, they are actually honoring the journey itself. They are leaving a vast open space for serendipity to operate.
They're trusting the chaotic flow of the road rather than trying to dam it up with a schedule.
Exactly. When you refuse to over-curate the future, you remain incredibly sensitive to the present moment. Think about it. If Kazu-san and Marcy had agreed, like, we must meet at the front desk of this specific hotel in Hanoi next Tuesday at noon.
The whole trip becomes a deadline.
Yes. The entire journey would become a stressful countdown. They would spend their days rushing to meet an artificial deadline, likely ignoring spontaneous invitations or unique detours happening right in front of them. The open-ended goodbye is not a brush-off. It is a profound act of relinquishing control.
That is beautiful. And it weaves perfectly into the core lessons he's been absorbing since he stepped off the train in Guangzhou.
It really does tie everything together.
He had to surrender his physical comfort to the tropical heat. He had to let go of the performative traveler ego by observing Kazu-san's quiet authenticity. He had to drop his sanitized illusions about nature in the wet market. And now, right at the border of Vietnam, he has to surrender his modern urge to control human connection. He basically has to trust the void.
He is learning that trying to tightly grip an experience usually ends up suffocating it. The beauty of travel, and arguably of life, is found in the empty spaces where we allow things to unfold naturally without our constant interference.
Which circles us perfectly back to where we began today. When was the last time you allowed an experience to remain entirely uncurated?
It's a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. But Marcy's time in Guangzhou vividly illustrates the immense, almost spiritual value of stepping outside our hyper-controlled, predictive environments.
It reminds us that when we strip away the algorithms, the five-star reviews, and the mapped-out expectations, we are finally forced to encounter reality on its own terms. We are forced to look at the bloody, visceral truth of how the world sustains itself, and we are forced to find our own authentic footing rather than adopting a costume to impress strangers.
And it leaves us staring down the ultimate test of that uncurated reality. Let's meet up in Vietnam if we can.
Cliffhanger.
The ultimate analog cliffhanger. The source material for this leg of the journey cuts off right there. We don't yet know if Marcy and Kazu-san will actually manage to defy the odds and cross paths again in that sprawling, pre-digital landscape.
I mean, the mathematical odds are certainly against them. But as we've seen, serendipity has a strange way of thriving exactly in the spaces where control ends.
We'll be diving into that Vietnam border crossing in our next analysis to find out. But that is a profound place to pause our exploration today.
I agree.
However, before you open up a new tab, before you check your calendar to see what your next hour looks like, or, pull up a review to decide what you'll have for dinner tonight,
Right.
we want to leave you with a different kind of question to ponder.
We've talked extensively today about the liberation of letting go.
Right. We spend our lives utilizing technology as a safety net. We meticulously plan to ensure we never get lost, never face a bad meal, and never lose touch with someone we value.
But consider the psychological cost of having an undo button for every aspect of your life.
Exactly. What if our obsession with being perfectly reachable, perfectly informed, and perfectly scheduled isn't actually keeping us safe? What if the reason we are so terrified of getting lost or leaving things to chance isn't because we fear we might not find our way back, but because we secretly fear we might realize we didn't need to be found in the first place?